Hi, everybody, and good morning here, anyway, from the Temple of Silence in southern Finland. And Tuija and I have left the far north where we're under the North Star, the Little Bear uh, Meditation Center, which has a quality all of its own. I hope that we can sponsor some events up there that will one day take some of you into the far north and experience what there is to be found there. We're working on this prevalent glamour. For all practical purposes, the major dweller on the threshold for our planet, built deeply into matter and not just apparent for human beings, but for the animal kingdom. The vegetable kingdom has that quality of recoil, and there's been research, that shows that the minerals are also reacting with fatigue and evidence of consciousness. So this is something we all really have to overcome, and I would say by the time we reach the fourth initiation, we have pretty well overcome it. We've learned enough about the ongoing nature of the immortal spirit, no longer to be afraid of annihilation. That's the one great impossibility, and it seems to be the root fear as well for so many. The possibility that they will cease to be. Well, we have to prove for ourselves that this is an impossibility. The one thing that can never happen is that the absoluteness or the utter beingness of life. I don't want to call it cosmos because it transcends cosmos. It can never cease to be, and has forever been forever. And that, try to wrap your mind around some of those apparent paradoxes, but deep down, that's what we are. When the what can I call them? The veils are lifted. The veil, consciousness, limited consciousness produces these veils, and when they are finally lifted, we will know ourselves to be that ultimate being or beingness or substance. No names will suffice, but we will no longer have the fear of ceasing to be, the fear of non-being, which is really at the root of everything, although the Tibetan is explaining some of the secondary fears to which we are prone, and we've been going over them. In studying these glamours, we really must, in fact, study. And he's written so much about the various conditions which surround the various glamours. Well, we're taking on a big one now, which is unconscious in the life of so many people. We've dealt and will continue to deal with the glamour of hatred, the glamour of egoism. So much is based upon the illusion of separation, which has to do with the limitations of our consciousness. If we could transcend our ordinarily viewed ring pass not, if we could do as the Christ does, if we could use the boundary dissolving power of Neptune, then this factor of separation and associated egoism and egotism, they would melt away, and we would find ourselves, as we will find ourselves one day, and have ever found ourselves to be, much larger beings than we imagine. We're only held in by the limitations of the ring pass knot of our presently emanated consciousness. But, we have succeeded over and over again. There's another one of those paradoxes forever, apparently. I often say to my friends, look, you're the successful graduate of infinitudinous universes. And there's only one graduate, by the way. There's one being that graduates, so to speak, and returns to absoluteness or absolute infinity. So, you've been through this before, forever. So the outcome is good. It's just that when we're suffering from limitations of consciousness, we forget how very successful we have forever been in expressing ourselves creatively and in returning to the absolute fullness which can never, in a way, simultaneously manifest itself as a tiny cosmos. So these are some of the philosophical things behind the glamour of fear, and of course it's all also built into matter, the recoil, the pain, unpleasant anticipations of the future, which the imagination, with which the imagination feeds consciousness, the unskilled, untutored imagination over which we have to gain control so that pure reason and intuition rule the imagination and not simply the dreads and fears and states in the lower personality functioning. Well, here we are. We're spread around the world, apparently, in different places, we have the morning schedule now. Certain people can join us for that. And when we have the late afternoon, evening schedule, other people are able to join us, and maybe some of you, for all of these webinars and for the broadcasts that surround them as well. And I would strongly encourage you to participate in the weekly triangle work, the Reappearance of the Christ work on Thursdays, the Soul of Nations work on Saturdays, and the Attracting Money for Hierarchical Purposes on Sundays. All of these things are part of each other and are vital if we, students of esotericism, are to make an esoteric difference, which will work out in the world as the much improved conditions which we anticipate will occur during the Aquarian age. So, all of us together, wherever we are, it's as if there's no real space or time between us right now. And as if we gather at a point of tension, which is defined by the Tibetan as focused, immovable will. Point of tension is a point of revelation, really. It negates, as it increases, the interfering vibrations of lower states of perception and discloses, reveals ever higher possibilities of perception and participation. So we have to learn how to increase our individual and our group point of tension in order to penetrate increasingly into the subtle realities with which we must learn to deal. So we will make ourselves available as an instrument for helping the hierarchy help humanity rid itself of this terrible problem of which, in relation to which both Alice Bailey and DK have what is called a horror. They, in the writings, it says they both have a horror of glamour because of the opportunities which it denies to people when they are subject to it. It's just so subtle, it's often our way of doing things, and we say, well, that's just how I am, but that particular way is cutting off reality, the perception of reality. So we have to learn how to see in a subtle manner and use the occult techniques that Master DK has given us to rid ourselves, our environment, and hopefully together the world eventually of this great veil, miasma, cloud, darkness, whatever, upon the perception of reality. Now we've been doing a little reading on fear. The fear of the future we dealt with last week, and it said about it here at the end, the fear of the future is therefore a distressing blend of instinctual memory, all the violence which has happened to us in our incarnated life over thousands of incarnations, and anticipatory imagination. What has happened in the past can happen in the future, and we don't want to go through that again, even though we will over and over. And few there are who escape this menace. Maybe when equipped with the first ray quite a bit, it is easier to escape fear, but then it's surprising about how first-rate people have some quite amazing fears that others don't have. Worry and anxiety are the lot of every man, and cannot and will not be offset and overcome by any lesser factor than the soul itself. So, obviously, our first real spiritual enterprise is to learn how to live as that lighted, loving consciousness, no matter what the ray may be, that consciousness of the interior being who stands detached from his personal expression. So to live consciously as a soul, this is part of harmlessness, and we can talk about it a lot, but how many of us really succeed in living consciously as a soul? So we've dealt somewhat here with the fear of the future. It is one of those fears that affects aspirants because they do want to make good in the world, And fear of death, of course, related to the fear of annihilation. But as the Tibetan tells us, with our ability to go in and out of the body at will, maybe some of us have experienced this at certain times, coming and going at will, appearing and disappearing at will. Some of these fears that have to do with apparent entrapment within the physical body will be alleviated. At least he promises that this will be the case. So we have, as we are developed inwardly, we have a lot to look forward to in terms of an increasing freedom, and with it a freedom from fear. Now there are a few more of these, and then we're going to deal with how to overcome fear. This book, A Treatise on White Magic, well, we can go anywhere. The Tibetan has written one big book, in my view anyway, and we can go anywhere to see what he has to say about things. But this particular book, White Magic, is all about the control of the astral body. And as many of you will know, and we've been through it, part of the arcane school, the magical work of the soul, focuses on the book White Magic. Now, there's so much of that book which is basically inaccessible to us at the present time. He's given us certain formulas for magic and certain rules, but he hasn't given us the operative techniques to activate these formulas. But he says if we study intellectually for a while, maybe a few hundred years, when he is in a position to give the operative techniques so that we can become practical magicians, then we'll be in a much better position to rapidly understand. So just as long as we realize that our training is going to go on during the entire Aquarian age and maybe beyond into the age of Capricorn. So you have to kind of get a grip, a Vulcanian grip upon yourself, and realize that we are all in this relatively for the long term, and that we're on our way to mastership and to the higher initiations, and nothing will stop us as long as we cultivate selflessness and conform to the age-old rules which give us a method, a trusted method of proceeding. So here is a type of fear, and few there are who are immune to this one. I recall a picture of Gandhi kind of having an unanesthetized appendectomy, removal of the appendix, and he was, during this operation, sort of chatting amiably with the press. Well, he apparently had some kind of mastery over the physical pain involved, and every high soul, high initiate and master will have that kind of capacity. So some people have this fear as the underlying cause of all their anxieties, little though they may recognize. And that's the whole thing about fear and glamour in general. It affects us, but we don't see it happening, and we don't see its modus operandi, and we have to become more and more familiar with it. It is really a result of the other three classes of fears, so death, future, fear of failure. This fear of physical pain is related to them. And of the strain which these other fears put upon their astral body, and the tension caused by the use of the imaginative faculty, running wild and anticipating all kinds of unpleasant things, and the reasoning tension in the physical nervous system, like as DK once said, he said, let's see if I can do this correctly. Yes. He says the following, if I can just get this correct. Can you stand, if I could just type correctly, the strain of knowing? Because knowing places upon us a severe strain, especially at the higher levels of knowing. And can we really contain that? Can we stand that? So that when we sometimes see this in the very intellectual types, where they really put their mind through such rigor that the physical nervous system is going to react. So an oversensitization of the nervous system is related to this particular fear, because a lot of people who don't have this this quality of hypersensitivity in the nervous system, they don't have the fear of physical pain. I remember a little story as a dentist back 50 years ago or something. He was kind of doing dental work on the main coach of the football team of the college that I was attending. And he said this man was very insensitive. He didn't even have any anesthetic. He just lay back, and the dentist could do all that work without him feeling anything. maybe there was a certain, non-responsiveness, a kind of Vulcanian quality there. Certainly not a Neptunian and a Venusian quality, which are hypersensitive. So anyway, the nervous system becomes very much oversensitized and capable of the most acute physical suffering. The water signs, Neptune, Mercury in combination with Venus and Neptune, these are the very sensitive indicators. Ills and ails. That's interesting. Ills and ails. I haven't seen a word like that. Like ailment, yes, but not ails. Ills and ails which would seem of no vital importance to the ordinary and more phlegmatic types are aggravated into a condition of real agony. The four types. The choleric is fiery, the sanguine is airy, the melancholic is watery, and the phlegmatic is related to the earth signs, and there the acuteness of pain is not as great. So this should be recognized by all those who care for the sick, and steps should be taken to minimize the physical condition through the use of sedatives and anesthetics, so that undue strain should not be put upon an already overworked, overwrought nervous system. I think, a lot of us are aspirants and disciples. We wouldn't be staying with this teaching if we were not, and there's a big sensitivity in such people, a keying up of the entire nervous system. So we have to get used to the idea, I think, that we are very sensitive to pain until we master the ability to come and go relative to the physical body, come and go at will. And the Tibetan now explains a little more. He says, "You ask me whether I'm endorsing the use of ether and chloroform in operations and of sedative drugs." Remember, this was written a long time ago in the 1930s, right? 80 years ago. Not basically, but most certainly temporarily. The discovery of Neptune, I think in 1846 or so, it really meant a tremendous relief from pain. Of course, a lot of people seek that relief by using Neptunianly related drugs for recreational and escapist purposes, but definitely it does take you out of the sphere of many of the pains. So whether that's legitimate or illegitimate and what's the motive behind it, that has to be looked at on a case-by-case basis. So temporarily, he says, okay, yes, these sedatives are needed. When man's contact with his soul is firmly established, and when he has developed the faculty of, and here it is, passing in and out of the physical body at will, these helps will no longer be needed. So, basically, when he teaches us to fall asleep consciously, as he does somewhere in the book Discipleship in the New Age, it's all part of this business of coming and going at will, which is necessary as we develop the initiate consciousness. So these drugs, they may be regarded in the meantime as emergency measures necessitated by world karma and the point of evolution of the race, not very high really, and not much in control of the inner subjective man. I'm not, of course, referring to the use of narcotics and of drugs by hysterical and unbalanced people. That's his view of so many who take these for quote-unquote recreational purposes, but to the judicious use of ameliorants of pain under the wise guidance of the physician. So there's always this balancing factor, which is very important, and you can understand that the master here is showing real judiciousness, a balanced point of view, realism, and yet restraint at the same time. So here is this discussion then of the fear of physical pain, to which I guess We've all been subjected to physical pain. It depends on whether we have this overwrought condition in our nervous system, which makes it a great dread that we would avoid at any cost. Of course, we have to learn how to go through everything, through and through and through. Nothing here in the lower worlds eventually is allowed to stop us on our return to fuller consciousness. And in the meantime, we lose our dread of conditions as they exist in these essentially unreal but actual worlds of illusion. The master is really the master over the lower 21 subplanes, and the participant in the process of the spiritual triad, but not yet totally the master in those worlds. It takes even a higher initiate to be master in those worlds. Well, I'd like us maybe to concentrate on one thing. The next one is it's really an important one, and I think it deserves its own time, and then we'll get into the elimination of fear by various meditative and alignment methods, and even calling in the entire spiritual hierarchy and the violet light, So definite occult techniques are given here, but let's just call this, if you will, the end of Dissipation of Glamour reading for number 53. And the next time, and I hope I'm settled in the United States by that time, I'll certainly let you know. 54 reading. And what day will that be on? Let's see here. Handy little thing. I'll be on the 3rd. So that'll be in the evening. Well, at least it's the evening schedule. November the 3rd. All right. So, we can relate to this. We can relate to the whole idea of pain and the kind of deterrent that it presents in our life. My old teacher used to say, well, if you have a hot stove, you put your hand on it and you don't have to be told twice to take that hand away. So there is a recoil from the things that cause distress, but eventually the negation of that distress through the mastery of the lower vehicles and becoming a master, becoming a high initiate. It's all a very practical Capricornian matter. And from theory, we'll simply have to go to practice and learn how to do these things. I'm recalling a story, back in 1951, the Chinese invaded Tibet. They consider it part of China. Interestingly, the Tibetan says there will be a very advanced school in Western China. He doesn't call it Tibet. It's interesting, but obviously it is Tibetan. And these soldiers were very frustrated because they would take aim at a monk, and the monk would simply disappear into thin air, as it were, having control over light and appearance. So these occult methods do exist, but we have to place first things first, and the first thing is right human relations and love and unity and the promotion of the welfare of others. And when those things are in place, then it is really safe and a non-egotistical practice to learn the occult cities and apply them for beneficial purposes. So let's, anybody who would like to say something, ask something, Okay, and okay, good. And saying hi here to our friend in Colorado, Roswitha. Hi to you, and welcome to all this. All this, as the Tibetan said with his characteristic understatement, he said, "I've given you more than you can ever absorb." And when you begin to read him with great seriousness, I guess for me it's been going on for 50 years or so, about 50 years, and Theosophy before that. He's really speaking the truth there. It's a tremendous gift, and yet it's just the ABCs. So we've been given a great treasure, and what we do with this fantastic teaching, how we apply it, how we learn it, well, that's up to us, but hierarchy has met us more than halfway and has given us what we need really to advance and be of use. So are there any thoughts which you would like to share, any questions that you have before we get into this meditation? It seems such a simple thing, this physical pain, so obvious, and we know that our present medical establishment goes a long way in trying to eliminate pain. It's a tremendous teacher, of course, because it keeps you on the straight and narrow. There are certain things that cause physical pain, psychological pain, mental pain. We learn to avoid these extremes so we can stay on the narrow middle path. And of course, one day we have to walk right through that pain, regardless of what it may be. And there are probably some very, very subtle ones, the so-called sacred pains, to which Madame Roerich, as a high initiate and disciple of Master Moria, she was subject to these things, and Krishnamurti, as he was in training by the Christ for some sort of overshadowing demonstration, he went through terrible pains, and I think it went on for some years. So when you really try to clean up the system from its habitual state, there's going to be adjustments, and the sacred pains are real. And as Master Moria says, talking about the nun, he referred to her as saying, I burn, So that's a real fire. And it causes an inner and subtle type of pain which the world does not recognize. And when you go looking for physical causes, it's not there. And this is particularly a planet where the graduates are graduates from the school of purifying pain, as it's called, PP, purifying pain, and releasing sorrow. The sorrow is a form of release, so this fourth path of pain, path of the fourth rate, is a rapid path if we can stand it. Okay, thoughts, any questions that you might have here? I'll be happy to, offer my thought in response. We're working at this together, and just think for a moment, what is your attitude towards pain? Maybe as we get older here, we experience it, a bit more readily as the system is not as well coordinated physically as it used to be. What is your attitude towards pain? Well, maybe the natural thing is to avoid it, and at first anyway. And pain is a great protection. It marks out certain boundaries into which you at first ought not to trespass. I'm recalling Master Moria speaking of anesthetizing the effect of the, stake. In those days, a lot of use of fire to burn the sinners and all that, as it was conceived. And apparently there's a method of anesthetizing the pain of that kind of fiery death. But then he talks about the psychological pain of seeing your ideas distorted as they go out into the world. And he says it's even easier to anesthetize the pain of the stake than to see the terrible distortion which good ideas, redeeming ideas suffer because of the ignorance of the field into which they are received. So on this planet especially, we have to, as adjudicators between the pairs of opposites, as we are called, adjudicators, we have to get used to pain and the neutralization of pain. And all of that is very much the function of karma to a certain extent. Karma is so often associated with pain, but it also deals with the negation of pain. Okay, friends. If there's nothing else to be said at the moment, just consider deeply what you are willing to bear. Everyone bears their cross, It's part of the astrological condition of our elevation to bear the cross. And, this has been outpictured by numerous world saviors as they take on the karma not just of themselves, but of the surroundings as redeemers. So we're going to have to come to terms with physical pain and the other associated pains, which may be even more dire to the psyche. This just happens to be the planet on which we find ourselves as monads for whatever reason, coming from other places and obviously here to redeem and here to learn. So in these days when humanity is so anguished and people are suffering so greatly from natural disasters and from illnesses, and I was just reading, Puerto Rico, there's a response has been so slow for various reasons that are not laudable, that deadly diseases are brewing for the people. And then is it Madagascar where the plague is again unleashed, the Black Death and so forth? We're on quite a planet here, the planetary hospital, the solar systemic hospital, I think sometimes. And we just have to come to terms with how much we are willing to bear, to go through. And even if we can handle it physically, can we handle it psychologically? Because in the long run, those tend to be the more acute types of pain. I mean, let's just say, I was talking about first-rate types, and it's not for all, of course. Nothing's for all, but they can handle a lot of physical pain. And the question is, can they handle some of the psychological vulnerability, which other ray types can handle maybe more easily? So everyone has their Achilles heel. Everybody has something which makes them vulnerable, and we have to overcome these vulnerabilities. All right, friends. Let's meditate. And then next week we'll undertake this big one, the fear of failure. And that, along with the fear of the future, is really what's affecting aspirants particularly, and disciples. We're all aspirants and disciples in a way. And there's just a certain amount of practical gearing up that we have to do in order to be useful to the hierarchy. And I guess that's what, Tuija, Olivia, and I, we, in doing this glamour work, inviting you into this, we're trying to help equip the inner workers so that they are strong enough to withstand some of the end of the age conditions to which we are now subject. It's a big change. All kinds of stuff is coming to the surface under Pluto, and the will to get a hold of it under Vulcan is creating a huge cross current. We're really passing through it, and on this planet of acute suffering, along with Mars and Saturn. Only on Mars, Saturn, and Earth is this kind of suffering to be found. So we gird ourselves up and we realize we will go through it as we have forever. But, when you have a limited consciousness, as we all do, we forget some of our successes from the past. All right. So we'll work here particularly with fear, but we will focus mainly also on the fear of physical pain, which really is very wide spread. We'll try to contribute something psychologically to its alleviation. Okay. So a little silence then, as we all gather in that synthesis which the silence promotes. So I think we can feel ourselves coming together under the influence of the soul, and as an increasingly unified group to participate in a suggested form of service. And this work is subtle, and it does have its dangers. I've said before, the early group back in the early 30s was attacked or left themselves open to attack through glamour, and it did a lot of havoc for some people, and repair work had to be done, so we don't treat casually this need for protection. So we'll use this cross involving the eyes. He calls it the cross of divinity. It's kind of a long-armed cross. As we say the protective formula and make the sign of this lighted cross, which for all of us is a kind of protection. As a soul, I work in light, and darkness cannot touch me. I take my stand within the light. I work. And from that point, I never move. And feel the lighted cross here. Obviously, heart and vision are activated in this cross. So, these chakras involved in seeing and detecting the truth, the doctrine of the eye and the doctrine of the heart. And then we will unite the lights, bringing up the light of matter, especially etheric physical, imagining it rise to the mental plane where the light of mind is found, the light of reason, blending these two lights. Vitality and reason blended, and then the light of the soul. It's real. We attempt to recognize soul light. We sometimes can visualize a source above the head. And we bring that soul light also down into the area of the customary mind and fuse. We see the fusion of soul light with the light of reason, the light of matter, vitality. The three are merged as one on the normal plane of mind. And this will be the source of our searchlight, at once a means of revelation, a means of dissipation, a weapon against those miasmas which prevent the perception of reality, something like the horn of the unicorn. It has first, second, and third ray potencies, all of them. And then, with this triple light as one, we will say together, followed by the sacred word, the light is one, and in that light shall we see light. This is the light that turns the darkness into day. Oh. In that light shall we see light, and eventually it is the light of the intuition which is to be revealed by the coming together of the lower lights, the light of the Buddhic plane, the light of day, as it is called, under, believe it or not, under Scorpio, which also rules the illumination part of the meditative process. Now, we're going to use the formula with its visualization, and we're going to visualize as we use this formula the great searchlight that we have created individually, and which is also a group searchlight, as if coming forth from the group Ajna Center. So we will imagine and speak together the formula. Radiance are we, and power. We stand forever with our hands stretched out, linking the heavens and the earth, the inner world of meaning and the subtle world of glamour. We reach into the light and bring it down to meet the need. We reach into the silent place and bring from thence the gift of understanding. Thus, with the light we work and turn the darkness into day. So, indeed, we are light workers, and the scorpionic light of day is found on the Buddhic plane. The world of meaning is the world of the soul, but the world of pure reason and truth and intuition is the Buddhic plane, and we start to have a connection there. Those are the heaven worlds. The worlds of the spiritual triad, and earth represents the lower 18 subplanes. So we're learning to work with higher energies, which we apply for revelation and for dissipation. And to strengthen our work, we invoke the spiritual will. It's not our personal will, and if we trace it to its roots, it's not even the will of the soul, it's Atma, the will of the triad, really, it's the will of the monad, the will of the spirit. So we see it descending through all the aspects of the group, and finally strengthening the beam, which we're going to use because this is willing work. And we say together, with power upon its beam, the light is focused on the goal. And so our means of revelation, our weapon of light, is strengthened by our willingness to do the will of the hierarchy and to help to dissipate and eradicate glamour. Now we're going to use the words of power. When we say this aloud together, you in your own place and everyone in their own place, the power of our united light prevents the appearance of the glamour of fear, especially the fear of physical pain. The power of our united light negates the quality of the glamour of fear from affecting humanity. The power of our united light destroys the life behind this glamour of fear. And this is dissipative work, banishing, dissipating the dark clouds, the veils, the miasmas, all this having to do with fear, especially the fear of physical pain. So, we're going to work a little bit in the silence, 5 minutes, as we visualize our beam, our will-empowered beam penetrating the glamour, producing its weakening and its dissipation. We work for 5 minutes with intensity of purpose in the silence. with fear driven back, not allowed to approach the life, the vitality which supports fear, vitiated, then we no longer cower away from destiny, and we find a way to go forward. And the sun of fearlessness, the sun of courage, the sun of bravery, the sun of contact with the immortal God within, that type of illumination shines in our psychological nature and relieves so many of the worries and anxieties and trepidations, and relieves us of spiritual cowardice. So we manage somehow to go forward and forward and forward with the first ray energy of progress onward, driving forward through space. And we'll close our meditation today. We'll sound the Om 3 times. Knowing that we have done a little something esoterically to contribute to the dissipation of glamour, the dissipation of the veils which prevent humanity from seeing and understanding the truth of things. So 3 times the sacred word. And may we all have the courage to come and go in the various worlds without hanging back because we are afraid of what we might encounter. So may the sun of fearlessness grow in all of us, and may we provide an example for others. Thank you, friends, for participating. Tomorrow, the Soul of Nations, and any emergency work, it'll be done as a broadcast. Tuija will be offering that. And you can use your usual Ask Comprehensive link. It's good for all of those broadcasts. And then Sunday, also in the morning schedule, the attracting of money, resources for hierarchical work. Thank you very much for participating in this, and we're chipping away at a very difficult and dangerous situation, but our work is useful, and we continue. So Olivia, Tuija, and I invite you to be with us next week, and we'll be working with fear of failure, I guess, and overcome bit by bit these factors which prevent us from living as full a life as otherwise we might, and prevent us from being as useful as otherwise we might be. All right, many blessings, lots of love. Talk to you later. Bye bye.